Hey, family, it's your sister Jocelyn here, and welcome to another episode of Faith on the Journey. If this is your first time tuning in, we welcome you. We are so glad that you are here and want you to know that we're committed to helping you strengthen your faith, heal your heart, and discover a sense of community. And we do so through a variety of ways by connecting you with a team of Christian counselors and offering trauma healing groups and trainings throughout the year. You can learn about these resources and so much more by visiting our website at faithonthejourney.org. Again, that is faithonthejourney.org. Now, today I'm excited to welcome to the show the beautiful Allicia Johnson-Niles, who she has a background as an author, a speaker who brings a message of hope. Now, Alicia's personal journey is shaped by her father's tragic murder while serving in the U.S. Navy, and that's what led her down this path of connection with God, healing, forgiveness, and miracles. And she's here to talk about her story and her grief journey as a young child and how God carried her through this process of healing, hope, and love. And so, Alicia, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Jocelyn.
Yeah. Well, I would love for you to just begin by talking about your story. You lost your dad at an early age, right?
I was 2 years old,
Wow.
and my
Yeah.
brother I have a younger brother who was 8 months old at the time, so yeah.
And losing a parent that early, you're so young, and so I think sometimes uh, people might underestimate how it still might impact a child, especially their life growing up. And so I would love for you to talk about your perspective and your journey and when did you begin to understand the loss? And then how did that loss impact you?
Well, it's interesting because I spent most of my life running away from it. I mean, the cultural stigma is, "Oh, you're so young, you're so lucky," and I thought that for a long time. I thought that most of my life, "Oh my gosh, I am so lucky that I was too young to remember my dad. I was so lucky that I didn't actually remember the knock at the door," because, you know, it's interesting because I was grieving and I didn't realize that I was. I thought I had escaped it, but I one thing that came along with that is I have grown up afraid of everything. Probably the biggest thing was, still to this day, I find it easy to be anxious about losing another loved one. I remember whenever my mom would leave anywhere, I would sit there, hold my breath, pray that she'd come home because I was afraid she wouldn't come back. Um, that was probably the biggest thing was being afraid of another loss.
Yeah, that's so hard. And sometimes we don't draw the connection as it relates to what might have caused us to have that anxiety or fear. And so for you, when did you begin to draw the connections on how the loss of your dad was impacting your life?
Well, it's it's interesting looking back. There's the psychological, there's the developmental, but there's also the spiritual side. If you don't mind me sharing, I would feel a little bit of a connection to him, and I'd be like, "No, no, no, no." I can't remember, but I started to. It was the first time I really felt a connection to him and really started to feel the loss was when I was 17 years old. I went back. He's buried in Arlington. I'm very proud of that. Um, so my family lives out west, and my dad's from DC area, and that's where I was born. And he's buried back in Arlington. And I had the chance to go back there when I was 17 years old. And as a child, I'd have little things where I'm like, that might be my dad, and I'd kind of brush it aside, and I'd kind of, no, 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 I can't miss him. I don't know him. That's messed up. I'm crazy. But then when I went to his grave for the first time, I actually started crying, and I felt that connection, and I felt that loss big time. I mean, my mom would tell me about my dad. One thing, she is amazing. I'd ask her questions, she would answer them. She was very open about the person he was. I got to know him as much as possible through her without knowing him. But still, when I saw his name, when I saw that headstone, this superhero I'd been taught about my whole life was real, and I missed him.
Yeah, and I appreciate you describing that grief that's still experienced, and you still missed him, and can you speak briefly to also the struggle that one might have of the memories that you weren't able to experience with your dad?
Even to this day, it's a loss because, you know, it's funny because sometimes I've grown to accept, and I know I believe firmly that guardian angels are real. And there is that, that feeling where it's kind of like I'd have different thoughts or different impressions that he was around and different feelings that I would brush off until I finally allowed myself to accept it. It was a little bit of a battle growing up because it's like there was this side of me, this side that really wanted to connect with him, and this other side that was like, no, that's not normal. Because in the grief culture, I dare say even today, it's like, yeah, they died last month. Move on with your life. And, I agree you don't sit around and let their death be your death. But at the same time, they still have a place in your life. And I think that's one of the biggest things is just like my grief journey was very, it's I was fighting with myself a little bit because I mean, there's a small part that was trying to creep in and it was almost kind of like he's like, I'm here, I still love you. And then there's the other part that's like, no, you're crazy. So
Mm, yeah, and you spoke about grief culture, and I want to dive deeper into that, especially as it relates to the topic we're talking about today for grief culture with kids. You describe how grief culture does not work for children, at least as it stands today in certain environments. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
yeah, well, for one thing, I think it's easy for people to be like, "Oh, you were too young, you don't have any memories." Good. You're sheltered from that. And it took me until honestly, I was 30 years old when I had a friend whose mom had died of cancer just a couple months before. And he's like, you went back to asking about the memories that I don't have, which I didn't answer that question. But he's like, I have the memories of my mom. You have every right to be sad. You have every right to miss your dad. And I it took little bits of permission, like, for people telling me that I was allowed that, and, you know, a little side note is I think from my experience, other kids that I've met that have, gone through trauma, especially, like, a death of a loved one, they're people pleasers. I don't know why, but it seems like people pleasing is a big common thread. So it's just kinda like, he said, "You are allowed to do that." And then I'm like, "Maybe I am." And then I started to connect some dots from growing up, and then I started to allow myself to feel him closer and be like, "Maybe that really is him talking to me. Maybe he really is here." But then there's always even now it's like, "Oh, but that sounds crazy." As I've been writing my memoir, I've had some crazy miracles that I absolutely cannot describe any other way except he was him. And so it's gotten to the point as I came to accept it, and this is something that I want to be very clear on is what I'm sharing with you is what is my belief. It's how what is real to me. I'm not saying it has to be absolute. And so, but when people ask me, what is your opinion about guardian angels? Do you think they're real? And especially mothers coming to me with little teeny kids being like, I lost my husband. I'll be like, you know, if you think they're there, they probably are. Allow yourself. I mean, I see no harm in being like, it's okay to believe that they're there with me and that they can talk to me now and then. Just so long as you don't go off and do something crazy. But
Right, right.
it's
Right, right, right. Yeah. Well, with that, like having you go through this journey and really being in a conflict with self around having space to even grieve and be connected with your father in spirit. I know that was a battle that you say you still struggle with today, and I'm curious as to what advice, if you were to talk to the little girl, the little Alicia years ago, what advice would you extend to her around this grief journey? What do you think could have helped you a little bit more to navigate your journey?
I would have been like, "Alicia, your daddy loves you. He's still with you, and the pain's not going to go away, and you will still cry, and you should still cry now and then." Not you should, I hate the word should, but just, if you miss him, let yourself miss him. Let yourself have those moments where you cry and you miss him and you honor the fact that you can't be with him because he's still there and he loves you, and someday you'll see him again. But, um, yeah, just be like, "It's okay," validate and just say, "These feelings are real. You're still loved, and God loves you, and God honors this relationship that you have with your dad." In fact, it's a gift, in my opinion. And
Mhm.
so, I would have gone back and said that, and also I might start crying here, actually.
It's okay if you do.
I think part of the people pleasing I didn't expect this.
It's
Part of the
um,
people pleasing, I can still see myself in kindergarten and growing up and allowing myself to be taken advantage of by friends and by narcissists and by boyfriends because I thought
mhm,
I was a second-class person, and when I really dig in I was 30 years old when I met that friend who and I started allowing myself to grieve my dad, and as I was grieving my dad, all of a sudden, my confidence just started to boost even more. I mean, I had confidence, you know. I was 30 years old. I'd worked in the beauty industry for years. You know, I had my own things going on, but it was just all of a sudden there was this piece that was missing that all of a sudden I'm like, "Oh my gosh." You know, I don't want to say I was fooling myself, but it's hard to explain what I did. But when I was younger, it was almost like when I looked back, because I even heard you say in one of your podcasts about how the ages between 8 and 12 are so critical, right? I was a fat kid. I ate my emotions. So we're talking snowball effect. We're talking I was nothing to people. We're talking even though my mom is an angel and my family is wonderful, I still had this belief and I'm like, where did that come from? And when I look back, when you're a toddler, you think everything is your fault. So
mm.
I'm like, if my daddy, this amazing guy back here, I mean, look how he's handsome, he was wonderful.
Very handsome man.
Yeah. I'm like,
Mhm.
if he was all that, if he is so wonderful, God must have thought that I wasn't worth it. I wasn't good
Mm.
enough for him. And so, as elementary as that is, I guess for a child that is, but I didn't believe I was good enough to be my dad's daughter. Like, God
Wow.
took him away from
Wow.
me. And
Yeah.
so I think that's kind of what started it. So I had this conflicted relationship with God too, going, okay, I know He's perfect and I know He loves me, but I'm not good enough for that love. And I'm not good enough to get the good things that other people who have their daddies, who have their, you know, their normal life. I'm not good enough to have that life because, you know, I'm not proving myself enough to God.
That's deep and that's real, and I think that is a struggle that others have had. Is like this cause and effect, where it's this false guilt that we're carrying that never belonged to us, this burden that never belonged to us, but it's so real. And so for you, because we're really kind of getting into suffering and our walk, which is suffering is something that we're going to experience while we're here in this fallen world. But sometimes questions around our pain and suffering and trauma and why did this happen, we can sometimes take on burdens again that does not belong to us. Now, I have some thoughts around that, but I want to hear from you in terms of what did you learn since then around that belief that you once had?
I think it's easy to be like, I have to take care of this by myself. Um, I turn to God. I mean, I that's one thing that I've been super grateful for is how I've been raised. I've always prayed. I've always been able to we've gone to church every week. And I've always felt that love from him. But what turned it around was really there was a while when I started praying to ask how God saw me and felt about me. I heard that assignment. I did that every day for a month.
Hey, family. I'm interrupting today's episode because I have some exciting news to share. Woo, I'm so excited. Drum roll, please. Okay, so my new book, Sister Start Your Ministry, is out and is available for purchase on Amazon.com. Now, let me tell you something. This book was a labor of love, and it's coming from years of my experience building a ministry, struggling through ministry, making mistakes through ministry, and coming across other women who were called to ministry, but they felt afraid. They felt like they didn't know what to do next. They felt like they weren't qualified, and they had similar struggles that I did when I was first getting started with ministry. And so, if that's you, my sister, I created this book for you to help you to be bold, to be courageous, to answer the call because the world needs you in your ministry. And so I encourage you to pick up a copy of this book. It will bless you. It'll be a good starting point, a great blueprint to get you going to your next level, whatever that may be. So I thank you in advance for getting a copy or two of this book at Amazon.com. So thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you soon. I was really just speaking to, and I'll kind of weigh in and then kind of come back to you on that thought that it was your fault that your dad had died, and the false guilt that you were feeling around the suffering that you were experiencing with this major loss. And the point that I want to bring forward is that sometimes things happen to us that are out of our control. Sometimes it might be something where it's God who says, okay, that person's time is up. Sometimes it's not that situation. Sometimes it's a violent acts. Tragically, when we have evil in this world, someone could commit a sin against that individual and take their life. Sometimes it's just a matter of our mistakes that we suffer, and sometimes it's Satan. That can cause our suffering. And so when we think about the fact there's Satan, there's a fallen world, we fall short sometimes, other people commit sin. Those are those elements that can contribute to the suffering that we experience here. But I think what can cause us some trouble, can cause us to get stuck is, say for instance it was someone who sinned against us, like if we're in an abusive relationship or we've experienced pain, if someone sinned against us, sometimes we can take on this false guilt for someone else's sin against us, and that does not belong to us. Simply speaking, sometimes it could be something where it's completely out of our control, like the death of your dad, but we take on this false guilt that's causing us to feel burdened about something that we had no control over. And so I think that was kind of the conversation I was having around the process of you no longer carrying that narrative that it was my fault that my dad died. How did you work through that?
It's when I allowed myself to grieve and miss him and everything like that. I also started to see more of the miracles that happened. And, it was actually when I was able to pinpoint that's how I was feeling as a child, like I must not be worthy to have my dad. And it was like, that's messed up. Of course you're worthy. Of course God loves you. And it's a process. I think and I really feel like once you start to and like you're saying, there's people sitting against you. There's the abuse. There's the things like that. And did I allow that to happen? Yes, I did. Was that my fault? I'm not going to completely give it up, but at the same time, it was my reaction to my trauma was I was used to and it wasn't until, of course there's God, but there's also therapy. I had a fantastic therapist.
Amen to therapy. Yes, ma'am. Mhm.
So, and I think we want to believe that we're worthy, that we want to believe that we're allowed the things that we see everybody getting. I mean, since everybody else's life is perfect, right? Not at all, but still, it's we want to believe that we're worthy of that. And when it's not happening, sometimes we wonder why, and it's easy to fall into that trap. But also knowing that, hey, you know what? God created me. I am a good person, and I know that I want good things for other people. It's knowing, I guess, am I allowed to say just the divinity within us and being able to experience that and just and believe it. Like we want to believe it's there, but just being like, you know what? It's okay. I can be confident in this. I can be confident in who I am. No, God did not punish me because of my dad. I mean, as weird as it sounds, there will continue to be a lot of miracles and a lot of beautiful things along the way, despite the tragedy. I mean, if I could turn back and be like, I don't have this power, obviously, but if my dad, do I wish he could have lived? Yes, 100%. But at the same time, I've been so blessed with so many resources, so many, experiences where there is no question that when I see him again, I'm going to know him. And I mean, I do. I know what he's like. It's funny because I'd have these thoughts growing up, back to dealing as a grieving child and kind of the battle, kind of going, is this me? I'm a mess. I'd have these thoughts. And I'd go to my mom and I'd be like, Mom, I had this thought, blah, 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 blah. And she'd look at me and she'd be like, that's exactly the way your dad would have put it. Or, Mom, did daddy use Irish Spring soap? Yeah. Just little things like that. But like, it's one of the reasons I'm writing my book, that I'm sharing my story, is because I want all these other little kids who are out there to be able to have that peace and to know, hey, guess what? He's still there. He still loves you. You're still wonderful. And you can have this relationship. And Like, I had my dad's picture at my wedding. So my stepdad walked me down the aisle, but my dad's big, like, this huge picture was at the end, kinda like they were both able to give me away.
I love that. And that's the beauty of being able to still honor, your loved one, whoever it is. It might not be your dad, it might be your mother, it could be a sibling, but there's ways to honor them. For those who are just listening to the audio version of this episode, there's a picture in the background of her dad behind her, just showing that I still remember you, Dad. You're still here. And I would love for you to spend a little bit more time talking about ways in which we can honor those who are lost, especially during times where it might be difficult, like a holiday, like I'm sure Father's Day could be very difficult, or Christmas. So, can you talk to those methods that you've used to help you get through those difficult days of the year?
The most difficult, I mean, Father's Day, I would talk to my mom. My mom remarried when I was 6, and that was hard. And I'll share a little bit of some advice I'd give parents when they get remarried a little bit later. But I stopped talking about my dad until I was around 10 or 11. And then um, I opened up to her, shared a few things with her, and that kind of opened up, like, we had this sacred time every now and then where I'd be able to sit down and talk to her. And so on holidays, we didn't really, again, because I grew up with my memories of those holidays being without him, but some days that would stand out would be, um, their wedding anniversary, and I would acknowledge it. I'd call her or be like, "Hey, mom, I'm thinking of you." The angelversary, do you guys use the term angelversary here, or is that
It's okay. That's a term I've heard before. Explain that in terms of how you use that term.
well, have you heard of Tragedy Assistance for Program for Survivors, TAPS?
I
It's
have not.
it is, side note, game changer for me. Peer-based support, in my opinion, is huge. So it's called TAPS. It's an organization for families of military fallen. So anyone who's served in the military, they have seminars, they've got retreats, they've got different things, they've got resources for those who were left behind by those who served in the military. And anyway, so I learned that term at TAPS, and also a term called God winks, where we believe that our loved one is reaching out. You use God winks, right?
I've
Okay.
heard that. I
So
love that.
I
Mhm.
do too. It's but the angelversary is the day they died. So yes, of course it's dark, of course it's sad, but I think that the term just brings a little bit more light into the day. And so my dad's birthday is March 24th. The day he died was March 27th. And so I have that sacred time where it took me a while to realize it, and again, it took me actually allowing myself to have that relationship with them. So as far as, like, you're asking about holidays and things like that, how do I honor my dad? I didn't honor my dad until I really allowed myself to grieve him. Like, every now and then leading up to where I was 30 years old. Um, like I said, I'd have those times where I'd talk to my mom. I'd ask questions that, as things would come up, I'd go talk to her. She'd bring down his box of things, would look at pictures, that type of thing. That I can say that's how we'd honor him until then. And maybe on the 27th, I'd be like, Mom, I'm thinking about you, that type of thing. But as I got older, either on the 24th or the 27th, depending on, the day of the week and what I was doing and stuff like that, I would take time and I would go to a solitary place and pray. I'd go to church or I'd go and I would just be with my dad because to me that was the closest place I could be since I couldn't go to his grave since I was on the other side of the country. So, there's that. Father's Day, I would talk openly at church about him. When I started to feel more comfortable, I'd talk a little bit more openly at church about him. Um, and honestly, besides the holidays and things like that, I mean, especially as you get older, I guess for prom, or the biggest thing was the wedding, I think, for a lot of people. So many different ways to honor him. For me, it was that picture where he helped give me away. I've heard of a lot of things through taps where they would have the brother's glove there on, I think it was on the ring pillow or something like that, but it's like just a piece of them, a token of them, allowing their presence, having a chair set aside for them. Um, my cousin's dad, he passed away, and they'd have a chair set aside for grandpa, you know?
There's so many creative ways. Whatever is true to you, whatever is meaningful for you, whatever allows you to feel close to them. I encourage people to lean into it. And I appreciate your vulnerability around this in terms of your own struggles of sometimes saying, am I crazy for doing this? I don't even like using that word. I think it's just so used so loosely, but like, is something wrong with me for feeling this way or wanting to, draw close? Or if I'm feeling him in the spirit, it doesn't make something wrong. And so I just encourage you to continue to speak openly about your experience, because I think that those who are listening right now, some have had similar experiences as well. And I do believe that my father passed away. It's been about a year and a half now, and
Oh,
I
wow,
believe he's
just
looking
barely.
down. Thank you, and I believe he's looking down on me, and he's with me. And when I, recently got married, I, you know, felt his spirit and tried to honor him as well in that time, because it was difficult not having him give me away, but he was with me in spirit, and so I do believe that as well. And when we talk about this grief culture, especially for our little ones. So I want to ask this final question for you in terms of, if someone has a young child who's experiencing a major loss. It might be a parent that the child lost. It could be a sibling. And first, that individual has to deal with their own grief of the loss
Mhm.
personally, but they're also
Right.
caretaking for a child or children. So, in a case like that, what words of advice would you give to that parental figure in a situation like that?
I've given this advice to a lot of people that way. But, number 1 is, like you were saying, they are dealing with their own grief, and they need to be smart about it. They need to find their community, and they need to realize that even if their child is not asking questions now, they will be, or they'll want to. So, leave the door open. Let them know that, "Hey, we still love this person. They're still allowed to be part of our lives." I mean, not drill it in, but just make sure that door is open. Um, the night my mom got remarried, they took my dad's picture down, and that I don't wanna be like, "She destroyed me,"
Oh,
but
tough.
it was I remember, she and my stepdad had gone on their honeymoon, I went to the piano where my dad's picture was, and I'm like, "He's not allowed to be here." And so
Mm.
I shut up for 5 years, and that was damaging. That's when I turned to the food. But anyway, my advice would be, um, you make sure you've got a picture. It doesn't have to be a shrine. Make sure that child has a picture of daddy or whoever, where they're allowed to take it out or put it away if they want to. Make sure, and also, I don't want to say force them to have conversations with you, but maybe have some sacred time where you're allowed to talk about daddy. Even if mom's remarried, you have that special one on one time with your child, and let them know that yes, they're still loved, because little teeny kids, half of them is them, half of who they are is daddy. And so if daddy's cast aside, so are they.
That is so helpful, and I think that one of the challenges that we have in grief culture is that sometimes it's easier not to talk about it because the conversation can be so uncomfortable, and it brings up these emotions that are so painful. So we rather put the grief on the shelf and just say, "Oh, stay over there," or if they don't bring it up, I'm not going to bring it up. But at the same time, we're both not bringing it up, and we're both hurting, and we're both grieving, but no one's talking about the grief. And so just leaving that door open for conversation is very important. And so I appreciate the advice that you're giving. And I also heard you earlier, counseling, Christian counseling can be very helpful to have that space that you're just allowed to weep, cry, remember, share, talk it out, because we don't want to continue to bury all these emotions inside, because grief is an expression of the love that we have for the person that's lost. It's natural to grieve. And so we want to be able to express that love that we have by being able to remember, shed the tears, and being open about how we feel. And so thank you, Alicia, for sharing your story with us today. And if someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach you?
My website is angelinarlington.com. You can look there. I've got Instagram, I've got Facebook. I'm starting to do more with it now post COVID, past everything else. But angelinarlington.com is going to be your main go to for the next little while. So it's got all my information.
Thank you, Alicia, for being here, and blessings to you on your journey. Thank you for blessing our audience today.
Oh, thank you. I've loved being here. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much, Jocelyn.
Absolutely. And thank you all for tuning into today's episode. I hope you were encouraged by it. And if you were, you know what to do. Please leave a 5-star review. And when I ask for a review, I really genuinely appreciate those who take the time to just make a note because, first, I read every review. And secondly, it helps us to reach more people, which is what we're trying to do, help to shed God's love, light, and healing to this world. So please leave a 5-star review and share this episode with a friend. And if you are looking for a Christian counselor, please check us out at faithonthejourney.org. Again, that is faithonthejourney.org. So that's it for this week, family. Thank you for tuning in. And until next time, you stay encouraged and you keep your faith on the journey. I'll see you soon, family.